So I'm Kelly, as I said before. I'm going to read from my phone because I can't speak off the cuff as well as Sam can. I want to talk a little bit about disability and health and the way that they're intrinsically linked. For example, I have facioscapulohumeral muscular dystrophy, which is classified as a life-limiting condition. But people with my diagnosis often die from health issues, respiratory issues, heart failure, stuff like that. So you can't really separate it in the way I think the legislation says, disability's out, health's in, because it's all the same. Really hard to make a distinction from the two. Like Sam, I've got really big issues about concerns about access to disability care and support, palliative care, and medical treatment. Taking disability out of it for a second, if we look at cancer, and we know that, people with cancer who have 12 months to live, they'll be eligible under the legislation. And then the legislation talks about all treatment options being exhausted before eligibility will be considered. But there are many people who could have life-saving treatment that don't have access to it. So their medication or their treatments aren't covered under PBS or other government schemes. So I guess looking a little bit about the legislation and that, half of the people who die from cancer die from a rare form of cancer. And so those people have no access to treatment unless they can self-fund it. So the treatments for these cancers are not covered by PBS. The people with these cancers are not eligible for medical trials or any of the treatment options other people with cancer can access. There's actually an impending Senate inquiry into this, and you can get a bit more information from the Rare Cancer Charity in Australia. So how can the medical profession say that all treatment options are exhausted if people cannot access the treatments to begin with? And it's not a small number of people. It's 1/3 of all cancer diagnoses, and half of the people who die from cancer. So according to the Cancer Council, almost 50,000 people have died in 2017. 12. So yeah, 50,000 people, and half of those have rare cancer who don't have access to treatment. So that's a lot of lives that could be saved if we have treatment. So I think the conversation first needs to be about how do we ensure that every Australian has access to treatment. The Rare Cancers Charity is releasing a report this week. I urge you to read it to understand how inequitable the health system is for some people before you vote for this legislation or to vote it in. There is lots of work to be done before we even consider introducing it. You can't bring people back to life once they are gone, but you can help to ensure people have every opportunity while they are alive, that they are supported and can access treatment. Please consider your decision from all angles and all perspectives. You have the power to decide whether people live or die. Please don't take that lightly. And it isn't only people with cancer who cannot access treatment and services. People with disability don't always have the same access to preventative health services as everyone else. A lot of the time this is because of lack of access. So personal information warning, I haven't had a pap smear in almost 5 years because the physical environment, every women's health clinic I've ever been to has a non-height adjustable bed. They're really narrow, so I can't get on it. I can't, and that's true for most disabled women. We can't access women's health clinics. Yeah, so it's an issue. So by the time we are diagnosed with cancer, it's late stage because we're ill. So that's a really big issue. And like Sam, the cancer and women in my family is really common. So it's a really high risk and not something that's in our control. So yeah, given that this is the situation for many disabled women in Australia, sure, we might not be able to access the legislation based on our disabilities, but like I just said, we'll be unwell and we'll have advanced cancer by the time it's diagnosed because we can't access preventative scans and stuff like that. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about recommendation 6 of the Ministerial Advisory Panel. So it was very contradictory and confusing. So that was the one that talked a little bit about that disability was out and health was in, and
And Kelly and I had a very interesting conversation last night that we both have life-limiting conditions. It's not the sort of conversation you normally have, and we don't usually talk about impairment. And I said to Kelly, what are you going to die from? Are you going to die like me, like from a heart or respiratory thing? And so we had this discussion because we die from medical conditions as a result of our diagnosis.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah, a guy I know from a Facebook group based on muscular dystrophy, he died of a urinary tract infection. But that's our reality, that we die from... my husband's a paraplegic and he's at home at the moment with a really big pressure sore because he's got no funding and no support. So, we become unwell because there's not support and there's not preventative stuff in place. And that, I've spent the last week begging people to give us some funding for a pressure care mattress. It's an issue. So what I'm asking is that before you take steps to make sure that people can die with dignity, as we hear so often, that you first make sure that everyone has the same opportunity to access health services and live a life free from discrimination, whether that be systemic, attitudinal or environmental. And just before I finish, I was asked to read something from another person with cystic fibrosis who, for personal reasons and around the impact of that person's family, wanted to remain anonymous. So they've said, in my experience, as a person with a lifelong terminal condition and a transplant recipient who was given 12 months to live while on a waiting list, there are no clear lines around ideas of choice, of dignity, of pain, of coercion, even of suffering. My thoughts and decisions at that time were bound in confusing mixtures of fatigue, medication, anxiety, hope and guilt. Concern for those closest to me and their burden of care was constantly in my thoughts. Cultural attitudes to terminal illness are underpinned almost entirely by benign pity, and our default discourse both reflects and reinforces this. Unbearable, helpless, without hope, suffering, inevitable, tragic, incurable. These are the words that I have heard my whole life to describe my life and prospects. They also, without coincidence, form the technical language of qualifying criteria for the euthanised. Until our culture can stop defining my life, my healthy, thriving life, with the same terms as it uses to justify reasons to choose death, I will not feel safe from social and internalised coercion to make free choices. Until we look deeply at our attitudes to disability and terminal illness, I do not feel yet ready to have this legislation imposed upon me.